Hello everyone, in this video I will explain how to replace a front wheel bearing on 2007 to 2011 Honda CR-V Sport utility vehicles. Step number 1. Park the truck on a flat surface, set the emergency brake and place blocks in front and behind the rear wheels. Lift the front part of the vehicle using a floor jack and place jack stands under the chassis for safety. 2. Remove the wheel lug nuts using an impact tool and a 19mm socket. Once all the lug nuts have been removed, proceed to remove the wheel. 3. Insert a small pry bar or flat-tipped screwdriver into the slot of the brake caliper in such a way that the tip of the tool fits between the caliper and the brake disc. Pry gently to compress the piston slightly and make it easier to move the brake caliper. Remove the 2 bolts that hold the brake caliper bracket in place with a ratchet or an impact tool and a 19mm socket. 4. Hang the caliper using a hook as shown in the image to prevent damage to the brake hose. 5. Apply penetrating lubricant to the area where the disc meets the mass of the bearing and to the 2 screws that hold the disc. Wait a few minutes and proceed to remove the 2 screws that fasten the brake rotor using a Phillips screwdriver and proceed to remove the brake disc in its entirety. 6. Remove the screw that holds the base of the ABS sensor with a ratchet and a 10mm socket as shown in the image. 7. Remove the ABS sensor by pulling it gently with pliers as shown in the image. 8. Unfold the edge of the CV axle nut, pushing it outwards with a punch and a hammer as shown in the image. 9. Next, remove the CV axle nut with an impact tool or a ratchet and a 36mm socket. Place a bar in between the wheel studs and the other end of the bar on the floor to prevent the bearing from rotating. 10. Remove the cotter pin from the steering tie rod end using pliers. 11. Loosen the steering nut with a ratchet or an impact tool and an 18mm socket. 12. Separate the tie rod end from the steering knuckle by hitting it in the center with a punch and a hammer as shown in the image. Once it has separated, proceed to remove the nut completely and disconnect the tie rod end from the steering knuckle. 13. Next, use a marker to draw a line around the head of the 2 bolts that fasten the strut to the steering knuckle. Hold the bolt with a 19mm wrench and loosen the nuts using a ratchet or an impact tool and a 22mm socket. 14. Remove the bolts completely by hitting them outward with a punch and a hammer as shown in the image. 15. Next, pull the steering knuckle outward with one hand and push the CV axle inward to disconnect it as shown in the image. 16. Once the CV axle has been disconnected from the steering knuckle, move it to one side and proceed to reconnect the suspension strut to the steering knuckle. 17. For the rest of the procedure, it is necessary to use a wheel bearing removal tool set similar to the set shown in the picture and a slide hammer. Some of the major auto parts stores in the US have this tool set as part of their Loan a Tool program. 18. Install the slide hammer attachment by holding firmly with the wheel lug nuts and tightening the rod nut firmly as shown in the image. 19. Next, slide the counterweight on the rod outwards till it hits the end of the rod as many times as necessary until the wheel hub is completely released as shown in the image. 20. Remove the circlip from the bearing using snap ring pliers as shown in the image. 21. Next, assemble the tool and the accessories of the correct size as shown in the image to extract the bearing from the steering knuckle so that it comes out freely. 22. Before installing the new wheel bearing, clean the inside of the steering knuckle where the bearing and the snap ring sit shown in the image. 23. Check the size of the new wheel bearing, ensuring that the magnetic face is installed in the direction of the ABS sensor. Note, the ABS sensor should be detached from the steering knuckle to avoid damaging it when installing the new wheel bearing. 24. Next, install the new wheel bearing by assembling the tool and the accessories of the correct measurements and guiding it to enter its original position as shown in the image. 25. Install the new snap ring in its original position using snap ring pliers. 26. Important, ensure that the splines of the new wheel hub slide over the splines of the CV axle freely before installing it, since the number of notches may vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. 27. Assemble the tool and the correct accessories as shown in the image and proceed to install the new wheel bearing hub into its original position. 28. Next, remove the bolts that fasten the suspension strut to the steering knuckle, pull the steering knuckle outwards and proceed to insert the CV axle into its original position. Once the CV axle has been guided into its position, push the steering knuckle back onto place, install the two bolts back on ensuring that they are installed matching the painted marks you made earlier to keep the wheel alignment, and proceed to tighten the nuts to the specifications listed in your owner's manual. 29. Install the CV axle nut and tighten it to the specifications listed in your owner's manual, and bend the edge of the nut again to prevent it from loosening over time. Install the brake disc in its original position, install and tighten the screws that hold it in place. Clean the surface of the brake rotor that makes contact with the brake pads with brake cleaner. 30. Install the remaining components in the reverse order in which they were removed, ensuring that all the bolts and nuts are tightened securely according to the owner's manual and that a new cotter pin is installed on the steering tie rod end. 31. Install the wheel and partially tighten the lug nuts. 32. Lower the vehicle to the ground and proceed to tighten the wheel lug nuts to the specs listed in your owner's manual. 33. Take the vehicle for a test drive to make sure everything works correctly and that there are no abnormal noises present. If everything works correctly, the vehicle doesn't pull to one side and there are no abnormal noises present, congratulate yourself for performing a successful repair and saving money at the same time.